A Senate candidate focused on the national debt walks into a public health conversation and starts asking questions most people in the field never think to ask. Listen to hear how she connects federal spending to community health outcomes, what entrepreneurs can teach public health professionals about funding, and the advice she has for anyone feeling stuck right now. You're listening to the PHEC podcast, episode 465. Welcome to the Public Health Epidemiology Conversations podcast, where we have honest conversations with public health professionals who are creating meaningful impact in communities around the world. They know that the field of public health touches everything. I'm your host, Dr. Charlotte Hughes Huntley, and today we're exploring the fascinating journey of our guests and diving into another conversation that bridges different perspectives with the practical wisdom you need to fuel your impact. Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining me on this episode. My name is Dr. Charlotte Huntley. I'm an epidemiologist and entrepreneur who has spent over 2 decades working at the intersection of health, community, and meaningful change. I'm also the author of The Public Health Consultant, Expertise, Entrepreneurship, Greater Impact, publishing December 2026 with Johns Hopkins University Press. Through my consulting firm, Dr. C.H. Huntley, LLC, I partner with large nonprofits, government agencies, and tribal nations on strategic planning and implementation, helping organizations turn health information into meaningful action in the communities they serve. A significant focus of our work recently has been in workforce development, and we approach it the same way we approach all of our strategic planning, by listening deeply, analyzing carefully, and building plans that are actually put into action. That same commitment to real, actionable public health work is what drives every conversation on this show, where public health professionals come to share their stories, their expertise, and their contributions. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so excited to introduce you to my guest on this episode. Today's guest brings a rare combination to the conversation. She teaches entrepreneurship, hosts a morning radio show, and is running for U.S. Senate in South Carolina as a Libertarian, with a single focus on the national debt. In this episode, we explore how federal funding decisions shape public health programs, why prevention care is so hard to sell, what Gen Z entrepreneurs are building to address mental health, and how asking better questions leads to better policy. The conversation is packed with fresh perspective and practical thinking for anyone working at the intersection of health, advocacy, and community. At the end of today's episode, I'll tell you how to find an exclusive follow-up conversation with my guest that lives inside of our private community. Let me formally introduce her, and then I'll connect our conversation. Dr. Kasie Whitener is a radio host, business owner, and educator at the University of South Carolina. She co-hosts Mornings with Kasie and Kev on 100.7 The Point, founded the boutique consultancy Clemson Road Creative, and teaches entrepreneurship at the Darla Moore School of Business at USC. She's a novelist with 2 published books and has served her community on the board of South Carolina Writers Association, and was a Grant Awards panelist for the South Carolina Arts Commission. She was state chair for the South Carolina Libertarian Party and county chair for multiple terms, and is the current Libertarian Party nominee for U.S. Senate in South Carolina. Let's connect my conversation with Dr. Whitener right now. Are you a public health professional thinking about starting a consulting business or exploring entrepreneurship? Then the Public Health Entrepreneurs podcast is for you. Visit publichealthentrepreneurs.com or search Public Health Entrepreneurs wherever you listen to podcasts. New episodes are released every Thursday. Well, good morning, Kasie. How are you? Welcome to the podcast.
I'm doing great. 2 weeks at the beach. I'm feeling the vibes, so everything's great.
That's a nice place to be on a Monday morning as we're recording this.
Absolutely.
Oh gosh. Well, we've been chatting for a little while before actually hitting record, just getting to know you a little bit, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Why don't you take a moment and just introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I'm Dr. Kasie Whitener. I teach entrepreneurship at the University of South Carolina in the Darla Moore School of Business. It's now our summer break, and so I'm also running for U.S. Senate this year in South Carolina. It feels like the right thing to do on a summer break is just decide you're gonna run for statewide office. I am a morning show radio host in Columbia, South Carolina, and have a number of podcasts and live streams. So being in the studio with you is very home for me. So I'm glad to be here, and thank you so much, Charlotte, for inviting me on.
Oh my goodness, it's so nice to meet you. Genuinely, I get very excited to get to know my guests, but you're a little special because you're my neighbor and you're so close, and to hear about all the things that you're doing that are very similar to what I'm doing is extra exciting. We're going to dive into a lot of what you just included in your introduction. I have so many questions for you. I'd love to, before we dive into that, one of my favorite things is to kind of roll back the clock a little bit. You listed some amazing things. You're, professor, you have a radio show, you're a podcaster, you're running for Senate. It's amazing. And people can easily look at you and go, oh my gosh, you've got it all together. Not to mention you're hanging out at the beach right now. But we all know that the path is sometimes a little squiggly lined. So I'd love to hear about the journey. So when did you first become interested either in, I'm really talking about this more public service facing role. Like, when did you first become interested in that type of role? And was there an aha moment or a moment that you just kind of like, this is what I want? Or did you fall into it? I'm just curious.
Well, I grew up in Northern Virginia. I graduated high school in 1995, so I'm not gonna take you all the way back there and walk you through 30 years of history, don't forget. But I grew up in Northern Virginia, which is, of course, really close to DC, so very much interested in politics, adjacent to politics for a very long time. I went to Clemson and focused on English and theater, and I did a sort of a minor in politics, but I don't think I got enough credits to actually get the official minor, but was always just kind of interested in it. So I've always sort of stayed close to it. When we moved to Columbia in 2012, I got really active in the South Carolina Libertarian Party. And a few years ago, a friend of mine in that party asked me if I'd be willing to run for US Senate. When Senator Graham got reelected in 2020, my friend said, would you be willing to run in 2026? So it's been about 6 years that I started thinking, is this the right space for me? Is this the right office for me? I knew I wanted to eventually run. I just wasn't sure quite where. And people say to me all the time, because usually you see somebody who's built a political career and they'll start in something like county council and like work their way up. But I'm not building a political career. I just want to address this one really urgent thing, which is the national debt. And the national debt is handled by Congress. Supposedly, they should be responsible for that. And so I looked at either the House of Representatives or the US Senate, and the US Senate offers me more opportunities. So if I get elected in 2026, I have 6 years to really try to build those bridges, meet that challenge head on, as opposed to the House of Representatives, where within 2 years I'd have to be running for office again. And it kind of eats up a lot of the time that could be spent doing what I feel like needs to be done as far as that debt is concerned. But in addition, every issue is a debt issue. And that brings us to this public policy conversation, specifically public health conversation, which is sort of an interest of mine because of my best friend, who this is her full career, and my husband, who's a nurse and majored in public health at Clemson. So the two of them very much in this space. And that got me thinking, like, where do I want to land here? What do we want to talk about here? What really matters here? And then how can I be effective for the people of South Carolina in that space?
Thank you for that. Right away, I'm listening to you, and I love the strategic thought process here. That comes very naturally to some folks, and maybe not so much to other folks. But I really like that. Also, applaud you for that decision. Like, okay, well, if I want to have the greatest impact, I need to be here, and really looking at that opportunity. Your connection to public health has also answered a question I was going to ask, so that's really nice too. Is there a particular population or condition or public health problem or issue that you're most passionate about?
Yeah, so through my best friend and her work, we've been looking at mental health with first responders and military veterans. I'm very passionate about that. Suicide prevention is important to me. My first two novels actually address suicide. So that's a really important issue for me as well. And we know that our veteran community is disproportionately affected by that particular thing. But then, as my husband's been in nursing and as we've been looking at our aging population and some of the bigger issues that affect a broader audience, we're looking at things like preventative care and affordability, but also obesity and fitness and nutrition and all those things that are creating chronic health problems. And so, how do we see public policy affecting or shaping those kinds of things. So I would say if there's a population I'm really super passionate about, it's going to be our veteran community and their mental health. I would say that second piece would be our overall broader long-term conditions and chronic illnesses and how do we prevent those things. I'm a big fan of preventative care, and certainly what we have in common is our entrepreneurship side. So a big fan of thinking about things like direct primary care and how do we get individuals access to healthcare without having to have job-related health insurance. So that's a big platform for me as well.
Yeah, and thinking about South Carolina, we lead the charts on all the chronic conditions,
Mhm.
and there's opportunity for great impact here because there's such a great need. Sometimes I wonder how much we prioritize prevention. It's a little bit of my own soapbox here as just at the state level.
It's so hard to measure things that don't happen. And so
Mhm.
it's difficult to put resources into something that doesn't have a measurable outcome. And I think, that, of course, thinking about it from a Senate perspective, when we start to talk about public funding for programs, we would be looking for key performance indicators. And yet it's difficult to say, well, because we put this nutrition in place, fewer people got diabetes or fewer people suffered from this or that, high blood pressure or something like that. You said, well, would they have actually gotten it if we hadn't put these things in place? And it's kind of hard to know that. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge with preventative care. But I'm a big believer in it. I do think that there's some way here, entrepreneurially, that we can find a solution to how we do that.
Well, Casey, we might have to put our heads together because I might argue that I could help you with that data to show where these
That would be
programs.
perfect.
I do get your point, but I think that there is an opportunity with science, and maybe sometimes another soapbox of mine is we do complicate some of the data points and the conversations around that to make it really harder than maybe it needs to be. But we'll put that on our to-do list and come back to it a little bit later.
I would love that.
I'd love to talk a little bit more about your current role,
Sure.
especially, wherever you decide to land in on this, where you're serving now and what programs, services are you leading, implementing that are, most rewarding to you right now? And I know you
Yeah.
wear many
So
hats. I'll let you answer that.
I'll start with as a candidate. So, as a candidate, the challenge is that I want to be somebody who is inquisitive and investigates and asks questions and learns more and wants to really have open discussions about these things and really considers all of our options. But people don't want that from candidates. They want candidates to give them their, like, these are my three things I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to make everything better. So that's a big challenge for me right now is trying to say, well, let's talk about what all of our options are here. And so as a candidate, I think that's a big challenge, seeing the difference between what it will look like if I actually get elected and serve, which I think I'll be very good at, versus this candidate role I'm having to play where I'm having to pretend like I have all the answers to things, which is just counterintuitive. I would say from a program perspective in the entrepreneurship space, we are focused at the Faber Entrepreneurship Center at the University of South Carolina on helping students build businesses. And a lot of our students come into the business world with their immediate challenges, the things that they personally are affected by. And every semester, I've got multiple mental health questions, right? Like people are saying, can we do an app? Can we do some kind of intervention program? Like, what can we do to help mental health? The young people that I spend a lot of time with, Gen Z, they're very self-aware as far as mental health is concerned. They have a extraordinary vocabulary to talk about mental health. So that's really exciting to hear them speak about it. It's always an app though, which is always kind of blows my mind where it's like, we need an app to help us feel better about how much time we spend on our phone. I'm like, you think the app is the way to do that? But yeah, I mean, it's fun to have those conversations with them because, like I said, they're so hyper aware and so in tune with their own mental health that I feel really inspired by that. And I feel like the future, as far as that particular social challenge that we have, that mental health challenge, is really bright because these are young people who care very much about it.
Yeah, yeah. We were talking a little bit, I can't remember how we got there, but in terms of, continuing with candidacy or your role as a candidate, are there some challenges that you're facing? I'm sure there are. What are those challenges, like the most pressing challenges that you have now, and how are you addressing those?
Yeah, the biggest issue is that I'm a libertarian, so we are underfunded, we're small, we don't have the resources available like the major parties do. And so we're not going to be able to play the game the same way they do in this election cycle. So we're trying to do things a little bit differently. Part of what we're doing is finding individuals like yourself, folks that are out there focused on a particular topic, and then spending time with them and in front of their audience. That rather than trying to blast out to thousands of people via traditional media, here's our major talking points at these high levels. Instead, I really want to do that in-depth conversation with you and with your folks. And so that's one of our strategies. One of the other challenges is that there's a constant news cycle.
Mhm.
And if you have a large staff that can respond to that constant news cycle, then it's, hey, redistricting is happening. You should say something. Hey, somebody said this. You should say something. Hey, somebody said this. You should weigh in. I'm like, I don't want to weigh in on everything. That's insane. I don't have the knowledge or the perspective to be able to weigh in on absolutely everything that's happening. So let's really stay strategically focused on our primary issue, which is the national debt. And the national debt as an existential threat. Let's make sure we're really bringing everything back to that topic. So that's the other piece, is really just staying really homed in on our particular topic.
I can appreciate that. I often talk about communicating, especially in a space where we've got very polarized. We've got, this extreme bright red to the very, very super blue. And that can cause a lot of people to step back because we have such extreme polarization right now. But
Mhm.
there's so much in the middle. There's also what comes up often is the challenge of trying to communicate with groups that maybe don't align exactly with you and your values. So it's sometimes difficult for people having conversations, not really sure where to do advocacy, how to get to there's so much that gets lost in all of that tension. So what you just described brings to mind, I would love for you to talk about some strengths of how do you navigate spaces like that to stay on target with the priority that you just mentioned of, focusing on the national debt? Like, what are some things that you can speak to regarding that?
Yeah, when I first started building a career as a writer and online, I read the best advice I've ever received, which is be interested, not interesting. And I thought, okay, let's do this. So every space I go into, the first thing I want to do is ask questions. And what's important to you? What matters to you? Why does that matter to you? How can I help? How can I be of assistance? What do you think my role should be in that space? And that's been really helpful. As you know, entrepreneurs are all about customer validation. So we want to go out there and say, I think my customers want this. Is that really what they want? So we launched the campaign in 2025, and we spent the first 8 months talking to people about the national debt, just asking them, are you aware of it? Do you know what this is all about? How do you feel about it? And the majority of the responses that we got were people were very concerned about it. They recognize that the United States credit rating has been downgraded. They recognize that the reason everything is so expensive is because we owe so much money. People see inflation as a problem. They see monetary policy as a problem. Like, depending on how deep in the economics they go, it could just be about like the price of eggs, or it could be about, end the Fed, right? Like there's this whole spectrum there. So mostly when I go into a space and I'm not quite sure whether or not we have common ground, I'll just start asking questions, and then asking, through those questions, having these folks I'm talking to reveal to me what matters to them, what their priorities are. And so when we think about something like creating health policy, that is absolutely not my expertise, I want to understand, what are the priorities here? What do we recognize as sort of our top 2 or 3 visible threats, right? That we as a society want to prioritize and recognize and say, we want to do something about this. And then how do we want to come together in that space? Are we thinking about, we talked about preventative care. Are we thinking about a public private partnership? Are we thinking about all of our stakeholders? Who's engaged in this conversation? So I would say it's really always, for me, it's that inquisitive piece. And you and I both PhDs, so we spend a lot of time in that research side. Like, it's not unusual for somebody with our professional background to go, I have just a ton of questions about things. And again, like, that creates a challenge for the candidate, because the candidate is supposed to be super assertive and I know these 5 things, but I'm not really built that way. I'm really more built to go, well, let's understand, and let's make sure we're making the best possible choice for everybody.
Yeah, yeah. That goes well with a priority for a lot of folks in public health is, we focus on the community. A lot of times the answers
Mhm.
are, we talk about the answers are in the community. It's like that relationship. There's
Sure.
that wall, and there's a challenge between organizations being able to build the connections and real relationships in the communities that they desire to, wish to. Your approach resonates really naturally with, I think, a lot of our listeners too, being inquisitive, asking questions, like you said, being interested as opposed to be interesting. I really like that. I'm going to ask you, go a little bit further, speaking about South Carolina. Let's fast forward a little bit and let's just get past elections. Let's role play for a minute. Assume, you've won the election. Like, what will be your approach? How will you begin to lead, as representing South Carolina in starting to, how will you continue to use that approach to accomplish the goals that you have?
I'm very much a community person. So I think if we can bring together a community of individuals or teams, our stakeholders. In business, we call it the stakeholder evaluation, where you say, who does this affect? What are they likely to say about this? Right? What is the resistance we can expect to encounter? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I would probably lead from that perspective. I would be looking for somebody who could, and it's more than likely going to be my bestie, who this is her focus to be the member of my staff that says, okay, let's pull together our community and all are welcome, open table. I'm not looking for,
Mhm.
a certain campaign donation is what gets you here. It should be more about, everybody that's got a voice here at this table to come in and talk about the things that we think are priority. There's a great effort happening right now called the South Carolina Forum. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's an
Mm.
online platform where South Carolinians can go and log in and just put in the ideas that they have. What are the things that they think our state house should be focused on? It's a nonpartisan effort. The idea is that regular voters can go in and vote up issues and say, wow, roads, yeah, absolutely, that really matters to me, or healthcare, that really matters to me. And they can try to set the legislative agenda for the incoming General Assembly that will come in 2027. So I like that idea of giving everybody access to some kind of mechanism to have a say in this, but also we're data people. So we want to look at where's the biggest impact? Where do we have evidence that this is going to be a problem if we don't address it soon? And this is, if it is already a problem that's wildly out of control, what are we doing about it? And what are the efforts that we have that we're funding that are not working? So let's shift those resources to things that are working. So I would kind of be looking for a lot of community support in that way and people who are experts in this field to come forward and say, hey, this is where we think we should be looking at putting resources.
I know you mentioned your connections to public health, your friend who works in public health, and you've been learning a lot, but I'm curious to know, when I say connecting the dots, oftentimes in conversations that I have with my guests, sometimes we give these really jargony responses. And when we're explaining what public health is, I think there's more power in a real plain language explanation and understanding that people grasp. So when
Mhm.
we talk about that, based on your role and people that you've talked to, let's explore the connection between public health and the work that you're doing in your own words.
Yeah, I mean, from a congressional perspective, from Congress's place, it's all about funding. Congress doesn't really do anything. They don't build anything. They don't make anything. They basically allocate funding. And what ends up happening is organizations come forward and they request that funding, or the policymakers say, we want to do this. We want a certain outcome. And so we're going to direct funding into this direction. The procurement process in government is really messed up. Like, it's really messed up. It's this very long, very cumbersome cycle. And I get it because they're trying to make sure that they're doing the right thing with these public funds. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of organizations that get overlooked because they don't have the mechanisms to be able to navigate those huge hurdles that are put in front of them. We also see corporate interests that come in, and because they do have the resources to navigate those spaces, they siphon off the funds that are meant for maybe more community or local solutions. So I think there's two pieces here. The first piece is the funding piece, being very strategic about where does the funding actually go. And then the second is the oversight, which is once we have allocated funding, let's keep up with what's happening in that space and let's make sure we're shifting the priorities as the progress is being made. So we don't want to continue to fund a program that was working in 1975, but now has very few recipients and has very little impact, right? If we solve a problem, then the problem is solved. That's great. Let's take those resources and put them somewhere else. And so I'm interested to see where in our public health space we can consider a victory, right? Like where have we solved that? Let's move on. And I think that makes people a little bit nervous because they think, well, once we fix it, I'm out of a job, right? And I get that. Like if you're depending on funding that is like, hey, let's get you to the point where we fixed it and then bye, go work on something else. That can create some perverse incentives around dragging things out, not necessarily getting the results we're looking for, or stalling. Well, I mean, we got some good results, but they weren't as great as we wanted them to be. So we're going to need another year of funding. And all of those are the kind of perverse incentives that we see in that government procurement process and things that the grown-ups in the room have to be able to say, look, I get it, but you've done really good work here and that's wonderful. And now I'm going to need for you to let it go so we can reallocate those resources somewhere else instead of just growing and growing and growing and never actually considering victories in some of these spaces where we have been able to achieve we have gotten some really good outcomes in spaces. And yet that funding has stayed in place. And I kind of think, well, I don't mean to punish you for making good progress, but I also think we have a limited amount of resources in that federal level. And so we should be really mindful of where we're putting those strategically. I don't know if that answered the question. I'm just sort of like monologuing now,
No,
Charlotte. I'm
that's fine.
sorry.
No, that's fine. I wonder, as you explain that, the question comes to mind, how do you decide? Is it about, I think before we even hit record, we talked about KPIs. So when you're deciding, making these decisions about the successes, how are we defining that or how are we deciding? Are we redefining those KPIs or key performance indicators? How does that decision get made so that we're not, you know, well, there's a phrase in public health where, when it works really well, it's silent. When there's no problems, public health is at its best, which I
Yeah.
know we have to do a better job of selling public health, which is why I spoke up and said, well, maybe it's, I'm volunteering myself to be of service, and especially as it comes to South Carolina or anywhere with helping to communicate and understand that data. But yeah, how do we decide? Because someone could look at that program and think, oh, well, yes, it's a solution, it's fixed or solved, and remove that funding, but maybe there needs to be continued for sustainability and something continued for preventive measures. Like, I guess a few examples pop in my mind. We've had so many lately where a disease has been almost eradicated and then funding and sources were removed, and then we start seeing emergence and outbreaks. So how do we decide where to remove it and how to shift those funds?
We're so good at processes, right? And so I think, part of that is saying, what is the model here? The model is discovery. And so let's put out, let's do a little bit of, okay, we have these various options. Let's try to plug in all these various options. Of the 5, say, options, 3 worked. So we'll stick with those 3, right? And then of those 3, we have a scalability factor. We can put those 3 into multiple communities. We start to see some really good progress. And then as we're seeing those numbers come down, okay, well, what's the next phase? The next phase is sustained, maintained experience. It's not the same. Those 3 solutions that we put in place, we were solving a problem with those 3 solutions. So now we're in a situation where, okay, what's the continuing maintenance of this program? And so I think that's where, and maybe it is because we get so connected to the solution itself that we think that the maintenance piece doesn't necessarily belong to me, right? And maybe I'm just going to use some like random stuff, but like maybe it's a healthcare organization like Prisma Health, and they're going to put out these 3 solutions. And then after a while, they realize they're not getting the return on their investment anymore. And so they're like, well, we don't really want to fund this anymore. What are we going to do? But these communities say, well, actually, it's really useful for us. And we can use it to train young people to go into the healthcare space. So let's create a new program that's going to be the maintenance program. And we're going to buy these buses from Prisma Health, and we're going to put these young people on there, and we're going to train them up to go out there and do heart rates and blood pressures and that. You see what I'm saying? So like
Yes,
then
yes.
that maintenance program is not the same as the solution program. But the solution program was so great and we loved it so much that we want to keep it going. But then but that's not the same piece. So we need to have like whatever the next stage is of that maintenance needs to come in place. And sometimes that's going to mean it's different people, it's different organizations, maybe it's younger people. But in any case, that means people lose their jobs. And I think that that's the piece there where we start to see individual incentives challenging the collective incentive. Because the collective incentive is like, yeah, let's move into the next maintenance phase. And somebody goes, well, but there's not a role for me in that maintenance phase. So I don't want to do that. I don't personally want to do that. And I understand that. I mean, we've been in that space. I've been in that space in academia too, where you've run a program and it's come to its logical conclusion. And you're like, well, there goes my summer funding. Like, I guess I'm not going to be doing that anymore. And so I just think we need to be maybe a little bit more mature about that and say, like, we get it. When these things run their course, it's time for us to move on to the next challenge.
I get
I
that.
know that's a terrible thing to say. Like,
No, yeah, I I think there's a way to I get the concept. I think about it internally how I run my business and how I
Mhm.
think about how we serve and support and offers that we have and what we used to do because I've had to look at it that way through business, what we used to offer. Some things I've just stopped offering, some things, I take feedback and we change how we offer that, and so
Sure.
I get it from that view.
And I think that's what when people say they wanna see the government run by a business person, I think that's what they mean, is that
Mhm,
when the needs change, the programs need to change. The
mhm.
departments need to change. The institution needs to change. And we just don't often get that in government. A lot of times in government, we have a building that is the building and it's the way they do things. And they've always done things this way. And they're not even recognizing that the needs of their constituents have changed. So I think it's honest and fair to say, like, hey, is this program still doing what it needs to do? And if it's not, how do we create that maintenance space? Or is it time to close up shop altogether?
Yeah. I get it. I also worked in state government for a good bit of time, some years. So I often speak to that. I understand the thought, the mentality, the structure. Yeah, there's somewhere in the middle, there's a nice hybrid. It's the right business folks or business minded people in
Mhm.
leading in that role that will make all the difference.
Agreed.
We're solving all the problems today, Casey.
Well, well, we don't wanna undo what we've done, right? I mean, to your exact
Right.
point, like, once we pull back on existing programs and we start to see the numbers going back up, if you're a doctor, you're like, "Whoa, whoa, let's up your dosage again and
Yeah.
go back to where, it was working. Let's keep the solution in place." So I think we
Yeah.
just wanna be really responsive to our constituents always. And we also have a lot of really small programs that, while they might be making an impact for 10 or 12 people, and that's wonderful, and I love that for those people, we need to be thinking from a public perspective on broader impact. And is there a way to find private funding or to find corporate funding that could take that off of our state resources or our federal resources when it is such a small impact? Not that I want to leave those people with no help whatsoever, but when we think of huge, broad public policy, we've really got to be mindful about whether or not we're allocating too much resources to something that doesn't have a wide enough impact. And that's what I meant by the KPIs.
Right, right.
And again, it doesn't feel kind and compassionate to say that. And I don't mean to come at this any other way than to say we've got to be responsible for the resources that people have trusted us with. And we've got to be really mindful about whether or not those resources are being spent in the best possible way.
I think you did a great job of explaining that. So thank you. I want to ask you one more question. I know we're really pushing time, but let's talk about our listeners. Is there a bit of advice or tip that you could share with someone who's listening to this conversation to encourage them through these challenging times in public health?
Yeah, I like that you phrased that question with these challenging times in public health. I think that captures the lack of trust, the uncertainty. There's a lot of tug of war going on right now where there's a sense of wanting to protect scarcity and
Mhm.
protect resources that are maybe being slashed or cut seemingly arbitrarily. So, my first suggestion is always to be very focused on creating value. How is your program creating value? How is your product, your service, your research, whatever it is? How are you creating value? And as long as you're really hyper focused on that value creation, then you know who you're creating value for and who cares about that. And what I mean by that is people will fund this if they care about this. They will put their money in that space if they care about this. And so some of it is government funding where we want to say this is a policy priority for everybody, right? And then others of these issues are not necessarily a policy priority for everybody, but that doesn't mean they're not a priority for somebody. Then the inevitable happens, which is like, well, I can't find funding. I haven't been able to get any funding. And at that, maybe it's just not creating value. And we know this as entrepreneurs that we go, I love my business. I am in love with my business, but I don't have any customers. And that means that nobody else is as in love with my business as I am. And so it's not the right thing to then go and try to, I don't want to say take, but try to use money from other people's pockets, let me put it that way, to fund something that the private sector or that your community hasn't already said matters to them. And this is little things like bake sales and GoFundMe. I mean, we see GoFundMe as a huge resource in entrepreneurship and any kind of crowdfunding platforms. If you can make a pitch for a crowdfunding platform that people will give you $10, $20, $50, $100, you have value. You've demonstrated that there is value here. People care about this. So I would just encourage our researchers and our NGOs, our nonprofit folks, the ones that are working in that public space. A lot of times the default is to go to that public money, to go looking for taxpayer dollars. But if that taxpayer well is drying up, then you've got to go find that money somewhere else. And if you're really genuinely creating value, you'll find it somewhere else. And I'm encouraged by that because I think that there's so much opportunity when you find folks that are willing to invest in that space, but it's a tremendous amount of work. And I get that too. Like, as an entrepreneur trying to build your business, trying to find the right customers, trying to make a go of it, it can be exhausting. And so sometimes it's just a thing of like, well, I'm not the right one to build this business. Can I find somebody else who's doing something similar and I can go offer my talents to them instead? And that's another potential opportunity as well, is to say, is there a place where it's not exactly what I'm doing, but it's similar to what I'm doing, and I'm still going to get a sense of productivity and collaboration and value in that other space? And again, these are hard questions for anybody in their career to say, like, well, I spent my whole career focused on this thing that I wrote my dissertation on, and it's my life's passion and it matters. And I think you probably remember, like, when we were in our dissertation process, all of our advisors were like, it's not your life's work. It's a capstone experience.
Right.
Just do it and move on.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many other problems out in the world that need solving that if you keep running up against a brick wall and you're not getting the progress that you need on this problem, go find another one. I mean, the world has an endless number of problems you can solve. So go find another one. And I think to be excited about that and be challenged by that and passionate about that is probably the best advice I can give folks. Don't feel like you got to keep spinning the same wheels over and over again. There are plenty of other wagons you can pull.
That's really good. That's a very different perspective. I'm not say so different that we've never heard, but it's freshly different. So it's nice to hear that. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for taking time to come on the podcast and be my guest and to dive deeply and to answer all my questions and share so much value here. I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so excited that we are neighbors and we'll get to work together. And I'm absolutely going to take you up on educating me on spaces that I do not know everything about. I absolutely am going to need help. I'm going to need really good, strong advisors. And I would encourage your community to reach out to me and be that for me. If you see something you think I need to know, my God, send it to me. I will read it. I will understand it. I will ask questions about it, but I can't find all that stuff myself.
Perfect. Well, we'll make sure to have all your connection information in the show notes.
Thank you.
If you are a member of the PHEC podcast community, then log in and head straight to the episode activation lab. There's an exclusive follow-up conversation with Kasie waiting for you there. Now, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as we did. This is a good reminder that public health does not live in a silo. The people making decisions about funding, policy, and community investment come from all kinds of backgrounds, and our field is stronger when we engage them. Whether you're a researcher, practitioner, or somewhere in between, the takeaway here is pretty clear. Know the value you're creating, communicate it in plain language, and be willing to follow the work wherever it needs to go. I hope this episode sparks some new thinking for you. If you'd like to connect with Dr. Whitener, then you can find the links to connect with her on the show notes page. The show notes page for this episode, which is episode 465, can be found at phecpodcast.com. Once you're there, just navigate to episode 465 to find the show notes. One more thing before we go. After we stopped recording, I asked Kasie one more question. The answer is waiting for you inside of our PHEC podcast community inside of the Episode Activation Lab. You'll find it in a post titled After the Mic. Remember that our podcast has an app and private community independent of social media platforms where you can engage with public health professionals around the world. In addition to being a part of this amazing community, your membership supports the production of this podcast and episodes just like this one. You can download the PHEC Podcast Community app in your mobile app store, and it is available for both Apple and Android users. You can also visit phecpodcastcommunity.com to join the community on desktop. All right, everyone. Until next time, have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you for listening. The show notes page is where you'll find links to everything we discussed in this episode. To find the show notes for all of our podcast episodes, just visit phecpodcast.com.